letting you in. Take a look at you and start to lose my balance. What am I falling into? This feels like something new. I've seen a lot of views, but they were nothing like this. The way you do what you do, I think you're something brand new.
Dear delegates, please welcome on stage the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic, His Excellency, Mr. Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to Greece. I understand from the organizers that you've never had such a number of delegates join your gatherings over the past years, and I guess it must have something to do with the location and the weather. But this summit is being held here not just because Greece is a beautiful country and because this is an extraordinary location, but also because the Public Power Corporation brought this event to Greece. And I do want to start by pointing out that PPC has undergone a truly remarkable transformation in the recent years under the leadership of George Stasis. I remember when I began my tenure as Prime Minister 5 years ago, PPC was probably the most pressing problem we were facing at the time. It was financially challenged, and maybe I need to be more blunt, it was literally on the verge of bankruptcy. It was organizationally lethargic, and strategically it was way, way behind its times. But today, the situation is completely different. PPC transformation story has been truly, I think, remarkable. It is a regional powerhouse. It is a serious player on the European stage, as is evident by Georgia's role in Euroelectric. And the fact that we are meeting today in this room, I think, is a testament to that change. But what happened with the Public Power Corporation is but one example of Greece's broader transformation over the past 5 years. When we came into power in July 2019, this country was literally devastated by a decade-long economic crisis. It had paid very dearly for believing populist fantasies. In 2015, we almost literally crashed out of the Eurozone. The economy was stagnant. We had the lowest growth rate between 2015 and 2019 of all Eurozone countries. And young Greeks were voting with their feet and abandoning the country in search of more opportunities abroad. Today, the situation is very, very different. Our growth rate is twice the EU average and forecast to remain high for the foreseeable future. We have lowered our public debt more than any other European country since 2019. Nobody is questioning Greece's commitment to financial discipline. Investment, industrial production, exports are booming. Credit agencies rate Greece as investment grade again after more than a decade. And high unemployment, when we came into power, unemployment was at 17%, has given way to now companies complaining that they cannot fill the jobs that they advertise for. And many Greeks who left during the crisis are actually returning, are coming back, and we will honor their trust in the country. And I think that Energy has been one of those areas, one of those sectors where our progress has been most, I would say, extraordinary. In 2019, just a few months after I was sworn in as Prime Minister, I addressed the United Nations General Assembly, and at the time I made the commitment that Greece would shut down all its lignite plants by 2028. Now, ahead of plan, we're actually close to meeting this target. In 2023, our lignite generation was at its lowest point over 50 years. And output has declined by 87% relative to its peak. And as lignite is phased out, renewables are taking its place. I just came back from a campaign trip to Western Macedonia, which was where most of our lignite was extracted, and it is indeed impressive to see, you know, the old coal plants sitting idle and lots of solar currently occupying the space, and it's a very good indication of what has been happening across the country since 2019. We have practically more than doubled our installed capacity, not just of wind, not just of solar, but also wind and solar. And Greece is now a world leader when it comes to the penetration of wind and solar. Fourth in the world, if you include smaller countries that mostly import their electricity. Second in the world if you do not, and only Denmark has a higher penetration of electricity from wind and solar. And this is a pretty remarkable achievement, and it did happen rather quickly. And this growth in renewables is a part of a broader system transformation. In 2023, we doubled investments in our grids relative to the average of the years between 2020 and 2022, which in turn was 50% higher than what it was in the period between 2012 and 2019. We are investing in pumped hydro. We have held 2 auctions for grid-scale batteries. We're looking again, and PPC has a leading role to play in this, in our hydro resources, recognizing that the prudent management of water can help on the one hand side with balancing the grid, but also building up our resilience against the climate crisis. We're finally rolling out smart meters. And when I look at this energy transition, I see significant opportunity. Greece has traditionally been resource, with the exception of lignite, has been resource poor in terms of fossil fuels. But we do have bright sun, and we do have strong winds. Anyone who has spent time in Greece knows this, and these resources can act as the backbone of a completely different energy system. And right now, our main headache is how to handle the incredibly high interest that companies have to invest in Greece. And to a certain degree, one can argue that we have been victims of our own success. And we have yet to tap our most promising resource, and that is offshore wind, primarily in the Aegean Sea, which has probably the best offshore wind capacity of any other area in the entire Mediterranean. And we see Greece can become a significant net electricity exporter over the years to come. This is already happening, for some hours, but as we fully exploit our potential, these hours will eventually multiply. And stepping beyond our national borders, we have also been able to influence the European agenda when it comes to energy. It's also testament to the fact that Greece is no longer perceived as a problem child of Europe, but as a confident country that can punch above its weight and drive policy at the European level, not just at the national level. We actually played some role in terms of coping with the energy crisis that Russia triggered after its invasion of Ukraine. I was advocating for some sort of cap on natural gas prices for quite some time before the European Union decided to go down that path. And I was actually the first to put the issues of grids and interconnections at the level of the European Council. And this was, I think, the starting point for which led to the EU action plan on grids and your initiative here. I understand, grids for speed is to an important contribution in this conversation. And grids have a key role to play, not just in enabling the energy transition of each country. In our case, for example, a big priority is making sure that we interconnect our islands. Big milestone was set with the interconnection of Crete, which is my home island, but the interconnections are expanding to all the important islands of the Aegean and the Ionian. But of course, interconnection and grids matter also across Europe, and you know better than me that we're still far away from a single market in Europe. And the lack of proper interconnectors is one reason. And countries at the periphery, such as Greece, sometimes move at a different rhythm than those that find themselves at the core, at the center of Europe. And we see that strong interconnectors can help us balance our system more easily, especially if we can complement the sun of the Mediterranean with the wind of the North Sea. I always keep referring to a nice diagram that my energy advisor showed me, which really indicates, how much excess wind capacity we have in the winter in Northern Europe and how much solar capacity we have in the south during the summer. If we were able to have proper grids, then we would really be able to help carry energy from where it is cheapest to produce to where it is most needed, and helping us deliver the energy transition, which is a necessity for all of us, but to do it at a lower cost. And to accomplish this, I think we need to think in pan-European terms and beyond merely national interests. We do need continent-wide planning, and we need to, I think, visualize electricity flows across a broader space, eventually bringing North Africa, even Middle East into play. We, for example, are discussing 3 gigawatt interconnection, electricity interconnection with Egypt. And of course, we need continent-wide resources to make these investments possible, and I will continue to advocate for those. I was one of the major proponents for the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which Europe created during the pandemic, when we took a very bold decision against what many countries believed at the time was the appropriate strategy, to borrow at the European level and to support both the green and the digital transition, but also to support jobs. And this happened during the pandemic. Greece is a significant, highest per capita recipient of funds from the RRF, in total 36 billion euros in grants and loans to be invested in Greece until 2026. But of course, we also have to take into account our shifting geostrategic agenda. We see other regions, in particular the US and China, have their own plans for the transition, and we need to incorporate these realities. And frankly, I'll be very, very blunt with you. When I look at the scale of our ambitions in terms of becoming a geopolitical powerhouse, in terms of driving the green and the digital transition, supporting jobs, and then I look at the resources that we allocate to those priorities, there's a clear mismatch at the European level, and this is something that we need to recognize. And at the same time, I firmly believe that we cannot erect barriers and expect Europe to be competitive through protectionism. But at the same time, we cannot allow European industry to wither away under undue competition. It's a difficult balance to strike, but it must be a balance also that needs to work for all European countries, and not just for those that have the fiscal space to spend freely. Some countries are in a stronger fiscal position. And of course, if state aid rules are bent very, very easily, it is those countries that have the strong fiscal position that will eventually distort the single market by simply supporting their national champions in a way that maybe other countries cannot do. But most importantly, the Green Deal needs to exist alongside other urgent tasks. We are at the forefront of the climate crisis here in Greece. Just last year, we experienced not just heat waves and wildfires. We're accustomed to wildfires, but we also, for the first time, experienced at this scale extremely catastrophic floods. All this happened within the span of a few months. There is also a fundamental discontinuity within the Green Deal between the funds that are allocated to mitigation, and rightly so, with our very lofty ambitions to become carbon neutral by 2050, and those actually committed to adaptation. Because when natural disasters strike, I cannot just go to my farmers and talk to them about, eventually, precision farming and replacing their tractors with electric tractors. They need support here and there. We need to understand that coping with the climate crisis also will require significant adaptation funding in the years to come. In Greece, also using European funding, we are investing more than 2 billion euros over the next 3 to 4 years to bolster our civil protection infrastructure. And all this is happening at a time when our strategic situation remains precarious. We know we must devote more resources to defend, and more than 2 years into a devastating war, we cannot harbor illusions about the utility of smart military investment. We need a European strategy for strategic autonomy, and this is coming from a country that has been systematically spending more than 2% of its GDP on defense, at a time when other countries were spending barely 1%. You do the math over 30 years. Greece never actually benefited from the peace dividend after the collapse of the war, of the Berlin Wall, and the demise of the Soviet Union. But now this again becomes a priority on all fronts. So, let me conclude that in a few weeks from now, Europeans will go to the polls to elect a new parliament, and I would hope that the forces of reason and moderation will again prevail. Of course, I'm campaigning for my own political family, the European People's Party, which is going to be the biggest party in the European Parliament, but by ourselves, we need to make sure that we have the proper allies to drive through reasonable changes and to restrict the influence of the extremes. My belief and Greece's belief is that we need more Europe and not less. There are people who think we must slow down the energy transition. I'm not one of them. It's an economic, strategic, and geopolitical imperative, but we must carry out a transition that makes sense, and one that also gives member states maybe a little bit more room to experiment and select the path that suits their individual circumstances. And it's important to remain flexible and pragmatic rather than very prescriptive and very dogmatic. If you, for example, look at the impact that the Green Deal has had on our farmers, I do think that maybe we got the balance, slightly wrong in terms of imposing unnecessary bureaucratic restrictions without understanding the impact that these would have on the livelihoods of our agricultural sector today. But at the end, what matters is not just climate neutrality after all. We are not the only. In Europe, we cannot by ourselves determine what will happen with the fate of global emissions, but what matters equally is for Europe to be a strong, economically and social, vibrant, but more importantly, geopolitically relevant around the world. And this Europe certainly will be a green Europe, but how we get there matters just as much. So thank you very much for inviting me, and I wish you the best in your proceedings.
Thank you very much. Thank you.